Hello friends, my name is Roisin and welcome back to my channel. So today I am making a video that is something I have never done before on this channel. As you can tell from the title, I am going to try and predict what 12 books will be on the Women's Prize for Fiction Longlist for 2022. I think there are 12 books on the long list. As you can probably already tell, I am not an expert in prize lists. I don't know that much about them, and I'm also not particularly good at knowing what books are out and what books are being hyped for the year. So I feel like I'm very underqualified, but I thought it would be fun. Basically, last year I read the Booker Prize shortlist, and one of the books on it I thought would definitely be the sort of book that would be on the Women's Prize shortlist, and that made me consider making this video. So I thought I would give it a go. To be or considered for the Women's Prize shortlist, the book has to have been originally written in English by someone who is a woman or non-binary, and it has to have been published between the 1st of April 2021 and the 31st of March 2022. So those are, I think, all of the conditions. Oh, and it has to be a novel, not short stories. I think novellas would count. I'm not sure what the length limit is, but I think all of mine are. I don't think any of them are particularly short. So, well, one of them is quite short, but I think it's long enough. So I have 12 books, as I said. I did get to 17 when I was sort of thinking of things that could have been on the list, but I cut 5 of them out, and if 5 of them end up on the shortlist, I'm going to count it as a win anyway. 6 of these are books that I have read. 6 of them are books that either were on my anticipated releases but I haven't got to yet, or are books that I've heard lots of other people talking about over the past year and sound like they would be Women's Prize. So what I mean by a book that is Women's Prize shortlist is that the Women's Prize shortlist, I feel like, often walks the line between commercial and literary fiction. So it doesn't go often too far in the like experimental version, maybe more so on the long list than the short list, but it doesn't go too far that way, or really into the women's fiction section very much. Usually there's one more like commercial women's fiction that makes it onto the long list, and I don't have any of those because it's a genre that I don't read, so I don't know what's hyped up, what's going on in that like direction of the genre. Like there was the Marion Keyes has been on the long list, and last year it was Dawn French, so there are people who are more on that commercial end, but as I said, I don't know that end very well, so I haven't put it in. But again, they don't put a lot of women's fiction on the Women's Prize shortlist, which I know Lena Normus has talked about how that's ridiculous, and it is, but they are, yeah, a little more on the like literary end, but not too far into the experimental literary end. I don't think. I think it's much more like a solid novel rather than something that's a bit bizarre. Although No One Is Talking About This was on it last year, which is a little less solid, I suppose. Let's talk through the books that made it on my long list, and I will begin with the 6 books that I have actually read. The first one is Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. So this one was on the Booker Prize shortlist, and it is a chunky kind of epic novel that follows the life of Marion Graves. So we start before Marion is born with her parents and how they got to meet, and we see how her life kind of intersects with big points of history, of American history in the 20th century. She ends up living with her uncle in the mountains of Montana during the Great Depression, and eventually becomes married to a bootlegger and becomes an aeronaut and flies in the Second World War. And at the same time as this storyline goes along, there is also another storyline of an actress in the 21st century who is involved in some scandals and ends up about to play Marion in the film of her life. And so the book is about like perception and fame and the way that other people view you. It is really, I loved like 80% of this book, and that was the 80% that was focused on Marion, and I didn't like the bit that was focused on the actress whose name I cannot even remember. I thought that the writing for that historical period was fantastic. Like, it really felt like an early 20th century American novel. It really captured the time period, and there was lots of beautiful nature writing, lots of writing about art. I thought that all of the characters were really well developed and their relationships were really well explored. The thing that I most loved about it was the really sort of lush and evocative writing. That I didn't personally like the modern time period. I didn't feel like it really brought much to the novel. I also found that character so grating. Like, I don't mind I like unlikable characters in novels. I love an unlikable character, but I don't like annoying characters. And I found she just completely rubbed me up the wrong way. I do think that if you watch Kieran from KD Books' review of this, you might see a different perspective. Things with dual perspectives in terms of historical fiction often do well. While they're not my preference, I think that a lot of people like it as a way to like gain access, and the thing that it was doing about storytelling worked in that perspective. The second one was also on the Booker Prize shortlist, and that is The Fortune Men by Nadifa Mohammed. And this is the book that made me think that about making this video. This is the book that I thought would definitely be on the Women's Prize long list. Now, I could be completely wrong, but I really feel like when I was reading this book that it felt like a Women's Prize book. It is set in Cardiff in the 1950s, about a man who is a Somali immigrant to Cardiff. He becomes falsely accused of the murder of this Jewish woman who is running a shop, who is killed by someone and they don't know who, and he ends up being falsely accused. This is based on a true story that actually happened, and it really explores the communities in Tiger Bay in Cardiff and what it felt like to live in this small town where everyone was like watching you and knowing you. Each of the characters kind of tells their backstory and their history, and so there's a lot about like storytelling, and it's also very much about colonialism and the attitudes at the time, and how that affects his trial, and also about, like, for example, one of his friends who is also Somali, I think, ended up in Berlin in the early 20th century as part of a human circus, a human zoo, sorry. And so that it talks about lots of different aspects of it, and there are some really expansive parts when we travel into the main character's past, and he talks about travelling from Somalia down to Kenya through Africa, and like that becomes much more expansive and beautiful, and travelling on ships and things. It's really, really well written, but it's also really dealing with a lot of serious topics, and I think that that is something that I've noticed in Women's Prize books. They are often like issue books, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I find the title a bit unwieldy. I don't know why they get titled that way, but I do think that there is often like a point being made in a Women's Prize book. Although I haven't read Piranesi, which doesn't seem like it would be an issue book, and it did win last year, but I do think that those sorts of books often end up on the shortlist, particularly when, like this one, they are very well written. Now this one I'm not sure, because I don't know about the author. So this is Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney, and the reason that I'm not sure is not anything to do with the quality of the book, but because in the book the character who is a lot of people have talked about as potentially being a stand-in for Sally Rooney, the character who's written 2 really successful books and is currently trying to write a 3rd, and is you know, a young woman from Ireland, talking about being in the literary scene. And she talks about how she doesn't like prizes and she doesn't like being put up for prizes, and so that makes me wonder. I know that like Ali Smith doesn't go up for prizes. Does Sally Rooney? This is a question. Maybe she's asked for this one not to be, and the only reason I say that is because of what's in the book, and obviously that is a character, not Sally Rooney, but it's just a thought that I had. Beautiful World, Where Are You is about I would say it's about 2 people, and then there are 2 like slightly more minor characters. And Aileen, I read this very recently and I can't remember the characters' names, who are friends, and they are like living in slightly different parts of Ireland, and they write letters, they write emails to one another about their thoughts, and about their life, and their relationships. So Alice meets this guy Felix, and their interactions and relationships are part of the story, and then Aileen has been known this guy Simon since she was a child, and their kind of interactions and relationships are also part of the story, and then halfway through they all like get together. It's a Sally Rooney novel, so like plot is not the main thing that you go into this looking for. There's not like events that happen as such. It's much more conversations and ideas and things being explored, people talking about their feelings. What I enjoyed about this book was that it was done as a conversation. I think sometimes when I have read books like that and they are restricted to one person's vision, I find them a little claustrophobic and a little like navel-gazy. I think that people would argue that about Sally Rooney books too, but I feel like when there's multiple perspectives being put in, allows for more like expansiveness. Obviously this was like one of the biggest book releases of last year, so I think that's one of the reasons that it's ended up on my list. It's one that I know a lot of people were super excited for, and so I would be surprised if it like didn't get a nod. Another one that is from like a book whose name I've heard talked about, any other people like reference a lot, and that is Matrix by Lauren Groff. Now this is the only Lauren Groff book that I have read. I did read this book at the end of last year. I listened to the audiobook though, which I think was a mistake. It was narrated by Adjoa Ando, and I don't really get on with her audiobooks that well. It is about Marie, who is the bastard daughter of the King of England, ends up being sent away to a monastery because she's offended Eleanor of Aquitaine, and she ends up going to this monastery as a nun and then taking over and being the head of this monastery. And it's just about her building up this monastery, her obsession with Eleanor. She was also a writer and a mystic, and she's a real person, so this is based on real life, but you know, it's a medieval European real person, so there's not a lot of like information about that. Not a novel that I super enjoyed, but it is one that I think has a style that is very like popular among sort of a modern literary fiction style of writing, where we've got this historical medieval character, but it's being written in a very modern way, but not in like a tongue-in-cheek way. It was one that jumped about a lot in time and moved very speedily through very many different points, and lots of stuff happened, like a very plotty book, but also one with a really strong narrative voice, and I think that's one of the reasons that I feel like it could be on the long list, is that there is this very like stylistic choice in terms of the voice, and it is doing something a bit different than you would expect from like medieval historical fiction. For the Women's Prize, it's like talking about women's history. We're in a nunnery, so there are only women, pretty much all of the characters are women, and it's dealing with women's history and education of women and things like that, which I think again is something that happens on the Women's Prize, but but the voice is the main reason that I think that this one could be on the shortlist. One that does fall more towards that commercial fiction lens, and also was on my best books of the year last year, is Still Life by Sarah Winman. I think this book is absolutely charming, accessible, and being something that I think a lot of people would be able to get enjoyment from. It's a really fun book at the same time as being really beautiful and having an important message, and I think really lush and lovely, beautiful and intelligent, but also very accessible at the same time. Like, it's not too experimental, it's very much a straightforward story. So this is about a young soldier who meets a older woman at the end of the Second World War, and this woman has been brought to Italy to identify the pieces of art that were stolen by Mussolini and the Nazis, and he tells him that he has to go to Florence because something special will happen to him in Florence, and he goes to Florence and he saves a man from jumping off a roof, and then he goes back to his life in the East End of London around this pub, but when the man in Italy dies, he leaves his flat to this soldier, Ulysses, with some of the people from his East End life, and moving to Florence. And we follow their lives from there. And the woman who is an art critic, she does come back into it as well, being as a lesbian in London in the middle part of the 20th century. And so this book is about art and family and beauty. It is really, really lovely. One of those rich, lovely Sunday afternoon kind of books that you can really sink into. Like a little melancholy, a little sad, very, very human. And these characters, they feel so very well fleshed out and realised to me. Like, I feel like I could be sitting in that pub and I could know all of those people. I think Ulysses is probably one of the most forgiving characters I've ever read, and it's just really, really lovely and wonderfully done, and yeah, I think it would do very well on the Women's Prize. The next one, so the final one that I have read, and one that I'm less sure will be on the Women's Prize shortlist, but I really hope it is because I think more people should read it, is Build Your House Around My Body by Violet Kupersmith. This one is a little bit weirder and a little bit more genre, and I know there are some like more genre-y things, like Piranesi won last year and is a little more genre and a little bit weird, so I think that this could work for that sort of section of the Women's Prize, something a bit more weird. It's not super experimental, but it's a bit weird. So this is about two women in two separate time periods in Vietnam who go missing, and we follow the story of these two brothers and the girl that they knew in Vietnam in the 90s, I think, might be the 80s, and she's gone missing, we know, but like we see their lives together and the exploration of what happened there. And then we also have this Vietnamese American woman who moves to Vietnam and is teaching English in a school, and what goes on with her. And that sounds like a really simple premise, but it's a ghost story. There are lots of really creepy, weird things that go on, a lot of drinking alcohol and gender relationships and sexual abuse and things in this book, so it is quite dark, and it is one of the most wonderfully atmospheric books that I read last year. I don't read horror, and it was kind of classed as horror, and it was just brilliant. It was so really evocative. I really felt like I was in Ho Chi Minh City. I think that's where they are. I don't think they're in Hanoi. I think they're in Ho Chi Minh, and I really felt the like the sweat and the heat of it, and the like little bars that they go to, all the description, it felt really well done. And also of the like mountain town where the boys are from when we go there. I felt so like off kilter and unnerved the whole time I was reading this, and it felt like a bizarre fever dream, but in the best possible way. It's so bizarre and weird and brilliant, and the description is so great. It is really creepy. I don't often get creeped out by books, but this one definitely felt really creepy while I was reading it. So much fun as well, and I think that fun books are often overlooked, but I think that it has the like beautiful writing and it has the message alongside this fun, creepy, really weird book. So I hope that this one ends up on the long list. Okay, so now we are moving into the 6 books that I haven't personally read myself, that they're just ones that I have heard a lot of hype about or that I put on my own anticipated releases. The first one for this is one that I have not heard a bad word about, and that is Assembly by Natasha Brown. I'm pretty sure that everyone I know who has read this has really enjoyed it. The narrator of Assembly is a black British woman. She is preparing to attend a lavish garden party at her boyfriend's family estate set deep in the English countryside. At the same time, she is considering the carefully assembled pieces of herself. As the minutes tick down and the future beckons, she can't escape the question, is it time to take it all apart? It's about the stories we live within, those of race and class, safety and freedom, winners and losers, and it is about one woman daring to take control of her own story, even at the cost of her life. So as I said, I think that everyone who I've seen review this has really enjoyed it. I think that it's like quite a nothing happens book. We're very much following this one woman, and I think that that kind of being inside one woman's mind, it's not like any of the other books kind of on my personal long list. So if it did fit in there, it would be something new and different. Like I said, it's talking about like race and class in contemporary Britain, which I think is something that is often brought up in Women's Prize. There's usually something that's talking about things like that, very contemporary, very of the moment. So I think that it would fit in. And it is also like one of the most hyped books, particularly from like a debut unknown author, which again I think could lend itself to this list. Then one that I put on my anticipated releases twice because it has a different name in the States and I didn't realise they were the same book, and that is This One Sky Day, which I think is called Papisho or Papisho. I can't work out how to pronounce that in America. And so I'd seen everyone raving about This One Sky Day because of the beautiful sprayed edges as well as because of the book, and I didn't realise it was the same book, but it is. So This One Sky Day is by Leone Ross, and I think this one's a little bit more weird as well, because I know some people have absolutely loved it and some people have been like, that was a bit too much for me. So this has been described as a woozily atmospheric, magical, realist novel peopled by a cast of quirky, unforgettable characters. So yeah, a bit stranger and a bit more off the wall, but I think we have space for some more experimental novels. Dawn breaks across the archipelago of Papisho. The world is stirring awake, each resident with their own list of things to do. A wedding feast to conjure and cook, an infidelity to investigate, a lost soul to set free. As the sun rises, 2 star-crossed lovers try to find their way back to one another across this single day. When night falls, all have been given a gift, and many are no longer the same. The sky is pink, and some wonder if it will ever be blue again. So again, this one has been super hyped. I've heard a lot of people talking about it, and I think that's why I'm putting it on this list. It's one of those with buzz around it, enough buzz. I know that like whenever I get to see the Women's Prize for Fiction Longlist, there will be some that I have never heard of, which means that I'm probably missing them from this list, and some that are super hyped, and so I feel like this one could be more on the hyped end of that list. Another one that I've heard people talk about, and which was on my anticipated releases, and I think most of the people I have heard talk about it have liked it, is Fault Lines by Emily Itami. Now this was published in May last year. I think it was like originally going to be published before then, and it got pushed back because I think I put it on my list like ages ago. This one is set in Tokyo, but I think it was written in English, so it's not a translation, because translated works are not eligible for the Women's Prize. Mizuki is a Japanese housewife. She has a hard-working husband, 2 adorable children, and a beautiful Tokyo apartment. It's everything a woman could want, yet something she wonders whether it would be more fun to throw herself off the high-rise balcony than spend another evening not talking to her husband or hanging up laundry. Then one rainy night she meets Kiyoshi, a successful restaurateur. In him she discovers freedom, friendship, a voice, and the neon electric pulse of the city she has always loved. But the further she falls into their relationship, the clearer it becomes that she is living 2 lives, and in the end we can choose only one. So yeah, again, talking about women, I think that having like a slightly different perspective would be good for the prize. I do think that all the books I'm talking about are probably super hyped, so some of the less known ones I won't have on this list, but this one has been like really well praised, and it was also shortlisted for the Costa, exploring motherhood and Japanese culture. There were, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, a lot of books about motherhood on the list, so perhaps there'll be fewer this year, but yeah, I think motherhood is something of interest to the Women's Prize. Another one that was on my anticipated releases but I never got around to reading, because apparently I'm terrible at that, was the Love Songs of W.E.B. Bois by Honoree, Fannone Jeffers. Now this one, I think Matthew Sharappa is the person who has most highly praised this book and most like raved about it. I did have it on my list before that, but he definitely solidified that this is like a really good book, and breathtaking, ambitious debut novel that chronicles the journey of multiple generations of one American family, from the centuries of the colonial slave trade through the Civil War to our own tumultuous era. The great scholar W.E.B. Du Bois once wrote about the problem of race in America and what he called double consciousness. Ailey grows up in the north, in the city, but she spends her summers in the small Georgia town of Chickasetta, where her mother's family has lived since their ancestors arrived from Africa in bondage. From an early age, Ailey fights the battle for belonging that's made all the more difficult by a hovering trauma, as well as the whispers of women, her mother Belle, her sister Lydia, and a maternal line reaching back 2 centuries. To come to terms with her own identity, Ailey embarks on a journey through her family's past, uncovering the shocking tales of generations of ancestors, Indigenous, black and white, in the Deep South. In doing so, she must learn to embrace her full heritage, a legacy of oppression and resistance, bondage and independence, cruelty and resilience. It is the story and the song of America itself. Another one that I've heard a lot of people rave about is Intimacies by Katie Kitamura. Oh, I think Grace from GK Reads talked about this one, I'm not sure, but who else talked about it, but I think I've heard several people have enjoyed this book. And this is about an interpreter who's come to The Hague to escape New York and works at the International Court. A woman of many languages and identities, she is looking for a place to finally call home. She's drawn into the simmering personal dramas. Her lover, Adrian, is separated from his wife but still entangled in his marriage. Her friend, Jana, witnesses a seemingly random act of violence, a crime the interpreter becomes increasingly obsessed with as she befriends the victim's sister. And she's pulled into an explosive political controversy when she's asked to interpret for a former president accused of war crimes. So definitely merging the personal with the political, and how the confluence of circumstances forces her to question the morality of both her work and her personal life. So again, a book that a lot of people have talked about. I think it's quite like a slow moving, thoughtful, introspective kind of book. So I've got some of those and some of the more like epic plotty books. This one's about like politics and power, and again, a lot of people have really praised this book. And kind of it's about like being an outsider and having different perspectives. I think that I think that this one, from what I can tell, I haven't read these books, so I'm making assumptions, but I think that this one sounds like it would be one that would work on the Women's Prize shortlist. And then the final one that I wasn't going to put on this list, and then Simon from Savage Reads talked about it so eloquently, about how it's his like favourite book that he's read this year. We are only in February, but I think the way he talked about it made me think that makes me think that it's one that should be on this list. I think this is The Island of Missing Trees by Elif Shafak, and I think possibly Elif Shafak has been nominated before. Maybe I'm making that up, but I know she's like a really well-known author, very popular. Again, this one was shortlisted for a Costa or a Novel Award, so it is one that has already had a lot of hype. 2 teenagers, a Greek Cypriot and a Turkish Cypriot, meet at a taverna on the island they both call home. The taverna is the only place that Kostas and Daphne can meet in secret, hidden beneath the blackened beams from which hang garlands of garlic and chili peppers, creeping honeysuckle, and in the centre, growing through gravity in the roof, a fig tree. A fig tree witnesses their hushed, happy meetings, their silent, surreptitious departures. The fig tree is there too when war breaks out, when the capital is reduced to ashes and rubble, when the teenagers vanish. Decades later, Kostas returns, a botanist looking for a native species. The 2 lovers return to the taverna and take clippings from the fig tree and smuggle it in their suitcase bound for London. Years later, the fig tree in the garden is their daughter Ada's only knowledge of home she never visited, as she seeks to untangle years of secrets and silence and find her place in the world. Now this one I think is told from the perspective of the fig tree a lot of the time, or most of the time, so that's a bit interesting. And as I said, Simon from Savage Reads really talked about how much he loved this book, and it's by a well-known author, a very beloved author. So those are the reasons I think it could end up on the long list. I haven't read it myself. So there you have it, the 12 books that I think possibly could end up on the Women's Prize for Fiction long list. Let me know in the comments down below if you think there are any I missed off that you think could be there. Maybe they were on my 5 like bonus ones. And I will revisit this when the Women's Prize is announced. Long list. I will revisit this when the Women's Prize long list is announced on the 8th of March. And I will see how well I've done. At least, hoping for at least 2. I think that's what I'm aiming for, at least 2 of these to be on the actual long list. Thank you for watching. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and to subscribe. I put out new videos every Monday and Thursday now. I've moved. We're doing twice a week still, but Monday instead of Sunday. And so I will see you again very, very soon. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up and to subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.